Gemma, welcome to the ExchangeWire kitchen.
Thank you for having me. It's
so
been a wee while.
It has been a while. I'm so excited to have you here because I love doing stuff with you, and we worked out for 4 years, so that's too long.
It's been a long pause.
Yeah, a very long pause, but I'm pleased that we've pressed play on the pause. You are now CEO of VML WPP in Luxembourg. And you are here today to talk about agentic commerce, which is something I'm very excited about. We've talked about it a lot recently, and there's so much to unpick. I want to get started with...
There's a lot of buzz, right?
Yeah, isn't there?
It feels
so
like every
buzz.
other word that's being talked about right now is like agentic, and there's a little bit of like hype, but there's a lot of intrepidation and fear. So it's kind of like, what is it, right?
Yeah. Exactly, what is it? And specifically with the commerce, the word commerce added to it, I feel like everyone sort of thinks they understand what it is and what that means, but break it down for me. What are we talking about when we say agentic commerce?
So I think before we get into talk about agentic, I think let's talk about just general discovery and search.
Yes, great idea.
Like the way that people have been shopping, searching, discovering, right, has always been about, first of all, they need to see something. So it's about attention and, that active kind of consideration. Then it's been like, the browsing and then the purchase. And then, obviously retailers and brands want to then drive that repurchase rate and that stickiness. So that's been done through a combination of two things, right? So it's about brand salience, which we all know about, right? How do you create that human emotional connection and resonance with a brand? And then it's the functional aspects. So over the last couple of years, driven by retailers like Amazon that have really pushed their flywheel in their algorithm. So recent iteration on that is Cosmos, and it's been very much you've got to do a number of different things in terms of again, I don't want to get technical, but you've got to have the right stock provisions, you need to have the right pricing, you need to be super discoverable around keywords. So they've started enforcing or standardizing how discovery within retailers happens so that it's not really an infinite aisle. It's more based on a combination of factors around retail, but also around media. So, so they've kind of created the standard. Loads of other retailers have followed suit. We're seeing a lot of the social platforms moving in that space as well. Now, along comes Agentic, woohoo! And Agentic is basically where it's not necessarily consumers that are in and interfacing with these retailers or with these brands. It's little agents or let's say personalized shoppers who are machine-led that are going in and browsing, discovering, interacting and converting. So as there is now a machine-to-machine interaction between a consumer having this agent working on behalf, actually the parameters for discovery shift a lot.
Right.
And, there's a lot of intrepidation, there's a lot of fear, but actually there's a lot of opportunities for brands. So hopefully that kind of demystifies the direction of travel.
It does. And what are some of the biggest fears you're seeing come kind of on your desk? Kind of what are advertisers most concerned with when it comes to agentic commerce?
I think first and foremost, it's what is the art of the possible, and also what does this mean for my brand? So I break it down into kind of 3 C's. I need to make sure I remember them all. So I think I think the first one is control. Okay, so if I am actually not selling to a human and I'm selling to not just a retailer but actually an agent, how are they browsing? How are they deciding? How are they shopping and converting on behalf of consumers? So
that's the one thing I've got so many questions about.
It's about the control factor.
Yeah.
So the second one is about clarity. So it's actually, there's a lot of I think there's a lot of unknowns in terms of how something like Rufus or Sparky or ChatGPT or Gemini, Perplexity, I'm not going to name them all because there's too many, but how are they actually prioritizing? How are they ranking? What products are then being selected and chosen? So there's a lot of unknowns, and I think that brands are now testing, and I think they're throwing a lot of money at it, which, you know, there's the good and the bad of doing that, and to try and understand and learn. And I think the final one is about commoditization, so like the 3 C's. And commoditization is their brand equity or salience going to be as important, given there's going to be this functional restructuring of how discovery happens, whether it is person to machine or machine to machine.
So you've raised a lot of things there that I'm now going to try and have to remember all the things I want to ask you. One is, what does this do to what we would typically know of as the purchase funnel or the consumer decision journey? What does that do to how a brand would typically know how to market? They've got their audience in different buckets. How does it flatten it? Does it make this disappear completely? Kind of what does it do to kind of how a brand would go about trying to target their audience?
Yeah, so I think I think you'll get some people who'll say the funnel has disappeared. There's no fun. I mean, I've been hearing that since the first moment I started in marketing, which was a long time ago. So the funnel is not dead, right? Like the funnel is not disappearing. I think it's just shifting, right? Yeah. And actually, whether you go into awareness, rather than it going to be like text-based or keyword-based, it's going to be about prompts, right? Like that's what it is. It's about how do you make sure that you own that share of mention within whatever the kind of the LLM or the kind of geo space is, right? Like, you know, what you want to own that answer. So that's the kind of awareness or active consideration. Under consideration, it's like, again, you still need to make sure that you have authority, and you have to have the right kind of domain expertise and presence. So it's going to be very much around like kind of the making sure that you are driving those aspects of preference, choice and selection. And then in terms of stickiness, it's then getting into like, how do you create that repeat purchase, and there's other aspects that you can kind of pull through from, you know, the LLM. So it's not necessarily changing, it's just an augmentation.
How do you optimize? Like, how do you make sure your brand appears? What other things that the LLMs are looking for to make you, is it they're looking for product details, looking for materials? And again, it's all prompt dependent, right? Because if the prompt is, I want this product and it's made of this material and it's in this size, that then depends how what my descriptor is in the product description, and all those things matter. So I suppose a bit like if you worked in SEO for years, like it depends, there's so many different things you have to factor in. It's a bit of a dark art. This feels like a dark art to me at the moment. Is that the case? Will it become clearer, or will it always be a bit, well, because you know, the possibilities are endless when it comes to prompting? Does that mean that the possibilities are endless when it comes to geo, when it comes to optimizing?
Yeah, so I think you raise a really good point. There's a lot of testing right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, within our like Hatch House in Luxembourg, we have been working specifically with Amazon for well over 12, 18 months in the testing of our Rufus Ready solution. So I think the reality is that every category is different, every customer journey is different, so there has to be so much testing. But to your point, you know, when we're thinking about, and it's different when you're talking about, let's say, outside of a retailer. So I'm going to like focus the kind of conversation inside a retailer. Yeah. Because I think when you're inside the retailer, there's a lot of data and there's a lot of understanding about the individual consumer and how they're shopping. So I think that there's kind of 3 components, which is, you know, there's a lot of the kind of, let's say, historical sales data or retail data. There's then a lot of like media insights around, you know, kind of the, you know, audience sizing, drivers of behavior, all of that kind of good stuff. And then there's also the kind of content and creative side. So there's kind of, for me, there's like 3 factors. Yeah. I think you have to do a ton of testing to understand at a category level, okay, what's the dynamics in the category? What are your competitors doing? What are the non-branded competitors doing? And then what are the drivers within the category? Is it price? Is it promotion? Is it certain keywords? And then from all of that, you can start to ascertain, okay, what are the prompts? And I think you have to do a hell of a lot of prompt engineering. Yeah. And it's like, there's a lot of subtleties to this, which, you can build and train with, if you're a brand on your own or with partners to basically build out, tens of thousands of prompts to understand, okay, how is your brand responding based on your key customer, and how is your competitors responding in terms of being shown and being kind of the answer of choice. So I don't think there's necessarily like a silver bullet, right? Let's say, but it's just, I think you've got to test and be bold, right? And just try and iterate and see what works, but have a real structured testing methodology in place.
And what about measurement and insights? You mentioned there understanding how you're appearing versus how your competitors are appearing. Are you able to get those insights to see kind of, because obviously it's not just about what happens. The problem with LLMs is often, and I suppose within a retailer it's probably different, but if you think about it within a larger LLM like ChatGPT, Perplexity, the ones you mentioned earlier, if somebody does a prompt that triggers my brand to appear, but my brand isn't clicked on, I'll have no idea it's appeared. So how am I measuring, for example, is there kind of brand listening tools that can help me out with this? How am I measuring that versus how am I measuring what does success look like? And how do because there's so much testing, how are you able to understand what iterations are working and optimize accordingly, and kind of what do timeframes look like? Like how long are you leaving an optimization before you go, well, that clearly hasn't worked, let's go back to the drawing board on that one, versus, oh yes, that one little thing we did 2 weeks ago is finally starting to see results. Like it feels like still a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, so I think that the old let's say metrics that matter within marketplaces specifically are changing a lot, and I don't think that it's necessarily like netted out in terms of exactly what you should be measuring, but what I can say is certainly from the brands that we manage, and our view is you still need to measure a lot of what you have done in the past. So whether it's around ROAS or TACOS or impression share or share of search or your content ranking scores, as well as obviously like your sell-in and sell-out and profitability and all that good stuff, right? So there's all of those metrics still exist, but I think that we will shift to something that is going to be much more cohesive, which will cover retail, media, content and creative, right? And what I think the future is going to be much more focused on is share of model. So like, what is your share of model of a Rufus? What is and that's specifically within Amazon. What is your share of model for Sparky in Walmart? What is your share of model for Perplexity or Gemini, right? Like, so I think that that's the direction of travel. So that's one. The second one is then share of mention. So, and that comes back to the prompts, because ultimately, these answer engines are kind of like they're conversational agents, right? So they learn a lot about you. They pull in a lot around the context and the environment. They're looking at a lot of structured data within many of these retailers. They're looking for brand authority. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for review signals. So they're looking at like a ton of different things. Yeah. And if you're not looking at the share of mentions, then as something like a Rufus or a Sparky moves from being 3 to 5% share of total of searches and conversions, then that moves up to 30 to 50%, you're not going to be considered, and therefore you're not going to be recommended. And it's all about being recommended. So I think that is the direction of travel, but I think it's going to take certainly brands a bit of time to like get comfortable getting there, and I think it's going to be a sequence of things, not like overnight, right? We're changing all our metrics and we're going to be share of model and share of answer, right?
Yeah. And another question I have, just while you were talking, it kind of triggered something else. Is every prompt, because there's, if I think about SEO, I think about PPC. Kind of with SEO, it's all about kind of what happens within a website, and so all the things on the website will help contribute to the ranking, and everything I'm doing within that domain will help contribute to my overall ranking. With PPC, obviously, it's down to a lot of different factors like keyword, the ad, the URL, etc., the user path. When it comes to geo, within an LLM from a commerce perspective, is there any kind of brand credence that kind of builds up within the LLM, or is it only every single prompt is a kind of brand new prompt, nothing that's happened before will affect my response? It's only based on what I see to be the best product, based on what your prompt, what your query is? Or is there anything like, well, this brand gets mentioned a lot, so I'm going to pull this brand up first as a response because that one seems to be, like, is there any insight into kind of how that works yet?
Yeah, so it's a really good, and this is something that I'm sure you're getting asked a lot of these types of questions in your podcast. We get asked these every single day, and yes, it does, right? So again, it's still early days, and we are, for some of our brands, we are doing, one of the brands we were talking to yesterday, we're doing 45,000 prompts within the engineering cycles. Wow. So, testing is absolutely key, right? So you've got to iterate and test. I think that the brands that will win will be the ones that really understand certainly in their category and in the channels that they're selling in, what are going to be the triggers or the signals that are going to be driving the most kind of share of mentions. So we do recognize that there is a paid component, there is a kind of organic, and then there's also kind of a PR and a domain authority component. Right. Now, that is coupled with, and this is the important factor, that is coupled with you as an individual, because the models learn a lot about you, the way that you are structuring questions, about the types of things that you've been asking it historically, and then especially within like a retailer, it has all of your transactional insights as well. So when they pull all of these together, they're able to give you micro targeting and then give you really they can give you really precise recommendations. So we already know that actually the testing side will allow brands to understand much better around the signals, and therefore it could be, okay, I'm going to restructure my pricing elasticity within this category, or I'm going to look at my portfolio plan, or I'm going to look at what's the stock throughput, or it might be around kind of content and the types of keywords, and or around the kind of media overlay and how we're going to be deploying media. So all of these things are important, but right now it's still not totally 100% clear as to the factors that are influencing it.
And you guys produced a report recently, and one of the things that you mentioned was this kind of overlap and the interaction between the human layer and the tech layer. If I am an advertiser, advertising through a retailer, and I want to obviously sell my products, who am I thinking about when I'm trying to optimize and trying to create my campaign? Am I thinking about the agent that is going to be producing the prompt? Am I thinking about the person that is writing the prompt? What's my thought process when I'm putting a campaign together?
That is such a good question. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think right now all of our brands are still very much in human mode. Yeah. And they're like, I want beautiful creatives, and I want it to be I want to have that emotional connection and salience with consumers. I think that in commerce, hurrah to the commerce leaders who are, the champions in a lot of the brands. They've been thinking very functionally for a long time, right? So I think we're going to see this kind of melding of minds.
Interesting.
So certainly on the brand side, there is still a very much what's the big brand creative, what's the campaign ideas, how is it executed across channels and into individual retailers. But I think that with this whole idea of we're moving into this much more volatile velocity cycle, which it's all about that share of mention and share of kind of model. Actually, the very first thing is about structured data. And that's what, from a kind of digital shelf standpoint, or, whether you're looking at your product experience management. So what is your, sometimes some people might think it's a bit like rudimentary or a bit dull, but it's like, if you don't get your data structuring around your product, that's your naming convention or feature-led bullet points, or all of the different components around price pack architecture that is going to be used by the retailer. If that's not complete and it's high quality, then honestly you're fucked right from day one. So brands have to spend time getting that right, right from the get-go. Otherwise, some of the other components will not render to be as efficient or as effective. So that's kind of number one, which is you've got to make sure that taxonomy and data arsenal is right and being syndicated to retailers well. And then it's like, okay, how do you think about, and the way that we have been talking about it is this idea of a half-life. So so how do you use content as a way of ensuring kind of visibility right from the get-go? And that's traditional visibility, but then that's augmented with geo visibility. So then that's looking at keywords and feature-led bullet points and ratings and reviews, so you've got that domain authority. And then you overlay the kind of the media and the creative component, so that when you think of it as a half-life, these things, there's an interplay, so that actually you're ensuring that you've got that structured visibility, and as the models take hold, your brand is not just appearing, but it's really dominant within the answer engine queries.
That is so interesting. There's so much to think about. What if I was looking to kind of get into this more, and kind of, there'll be a lot of brands out there that are doing a lot of listening and a lot of watching and trying to understand kind of when the right time to make a move is. And it feels like there's probably a lot more hype around it than there is actual activity. Is that fair to say at the moment?
Yeah, I think I think with all brands, right, you've got a kind of bifurcation. You've got some that are super fast movers, and especially in I would say high penetration categories that are online, so fashion, beauty, right, consumer electronics, those are real fast movers, and some of our clients in those categories, boy, are they setting the standard, right? They're really pushing the envelope. But I would say especially in CPG, there's a lot of watching and seeing, because there's, again, the way that a lot of these brands are structured in terms of sales and marketing, and there's a lot more B2B that happens within those channels.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot more kind of looking to peer set, looking to other categories, looking to other markets, and trying to figure out, okay, what should they be testing, what should they be iterating?
They can't justify ROI as quickly in CPG, can they? Exactly.
Totally, because it's largely B2B, but actually that's where a lot of the disruption is going to happen.
That makes it very interesting for them. Yeah.
So I think that it's definitely a challenging time, but I think that there's a lot of people who are talking about it. I think that there's now, I think a lot of agencies have kind of woken up to the fact that they also need to make sure that they've got the right offerings in place, because this is the new battleground.
Yeah.
But I think, certainly from a WPP and from a Luxembourg perspective, we are co-located with Amazon. So we've, been
very handy.
We've been incubating and innovating in this space for well over a year, 18 months.
Wow.
Because we've seen, based on our offer is a 360, so we do everything for a brand in a pay-as-you-grow type of model. So we have to make sure that all of these considerations are well thought through. Otherwise, our clients don't grow and we don't grow. So,
yeah, wow. And so, what is the one thing that, for those brands that are interested in trying to get into it and start their journey into agentic commerce, what are a few things that they should be thinking about? I suppose a few things that come to mind for me are kind of, where does it sit from a resource perspective? Because it feels like it's going to be a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of brain power initially to kind of understand and get your head around it. Kind of who should be taking ownership of this? from within the brand themselves? Who should they be talking to within their agency partners to kind of help understand it? And you know, where do they start? Because it sounds terrifying if you're brand new to it.
So I think, well, first of all, they should give me a call.
I wasn't trying to feed that one, but it worked out very well.
I mean, just, you know, give the VML and WPP Luxembourg a call. You know, we've been doing this for a long time.
Indeed,
you know, we've got a playbook, so we can help you test.
Very well teed up. Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I think it's about like AI readiness. So AI readiness is a catch-all, right? So I think if we distill it down into commerce, I don't think this is like one person's job. I think it's like an every person's job. So it's something that is in the hands of everyone.
Yeah.
So I think that you don't necessarily need to put an industrial enterprise grade testing framework in place. You can look at, okay, what are one or two discrete use cases that are really important for your brand? So it might be, we recognize that I'm making it specific about Amazon, but we lose the buy box to these types of brands, or these competitors really conquest us at our product detail page, or we see that actually if we get into subscribe and save, then we our customer lifetime value goes way up. So I think for brands, like, take a couple of use cases that is going to have a significant impact to your business, and start there, and and then build out like a kind of, first of all, like, what needs to be true on your side, and that's people, processes, and technology. What do you need in a partner, right? Like, and again, there's always different models, which is, it might be fully in-house, or it might be fully outsourced, or it might be a halfway house, right? Like, and again, all of those things work well for different types of clients. And then I think it's like, okay, what's an AI readiness roadmap? So, or an agentic commerce readiness roadmap. And, it's, bringing in an expert is great, but equally having ownership and having buy-in internally is really important. And then just like, a test, communicate really well within the organisation, and just iterate and test it, and then start to scale the things that are working, and then just leave behind the things that are not. So that would be I suppose the key recommendation.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to leave it there because I genuinely could keep asking you questions the next hour, and the camera's probably run out of battery. But thank you so much, Gemma, for coming in. It's been really fascinating. I look forward to catching up with you again about this in a few months' time to see kind of how we're progressing. And thank you, everybody, for watching.